Well, thank you both for being here. This is not your first time on that side of the table. I remember in a very informal setting 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe you guys were here, and it was very helpful. It actually initiated a conversation that led to a joint select committee last year where we had 8 guys on our side, 8 guys from the other, House and Senate, bicameral. We agreed on 4 or 5 things. We just couldn't pass a comprehensive bill. I'm not going to spend any of my 5 minutes telling the record about how bad this crisis is, but I will say this. The debt crisis is why I ran for the Senate. I'd never purposed to be here at all. The debt crisis is as real as you're describing it. I agree with you. Americans always deal well in a crisis. We're always one of the slowest to recognize we're in one. Well, we have been in one for the last 15 years, in my opinion. In 2000, we had $6 trillion of debt. The ratio to our GDP was very workable. Even by 2010, it was still somewhat workable. And we could debate how we got to 20 trillion, but now we're at 22. Here's the problem. We can't cut our way out. We can't tax our way. We can't grow our way out. It's got to be a combination of all of the above. We have been working for 4 years in a bipartisan way. Senator Kane, Senator King, Senator Whitehouse on that side in this committee have been part of and about 12 Republicans in a very informal way in the last 3 or 4 years. It's uncanny that it's easy to attract ex-governors into that debate, right? And that mentioned right there, 2 ex-governors on their side kind of get it because by law, Senator Kane had to provide a balanced budget and it had to live within. You know, 44 states have that law, by the way. And oh, by the way, I want to go to the question. My first question is this. We could argue about the semantics and all this, but I agree. Both of you have said this. We don't produce, the budget is not a law. Therefore, the majority crams it down the throat of the minority. It becomes a totally political thing. And all that we talk about, reconciliation, the Conrad rule, the Byrd rule, all this are Band-Aids on top of a 1974 budget law that is the worst piece of writing I have ever seen in my life. It was never going to work. It is a disaster, and how it's taken 45 years for us to be here to try to get this fixed. We need your help. You're not running for office. You can tell us what you would do. We need to act on that. It was never a law. It was only dealing with discretionary, 25% of what we spend, and there are no consequences. In state governments, 44 states, if you don't pass the budget, you don't go home. It's as simple as that. They were 45 days a year. And guess what? Until 1913, that was kind of the story in the United States Congress. His primary purpose was we were here. Now we go through these machinations, and we have a release valve called the CR. This, as we're learning now, is so devastating. Since the Budget Control Act, we have cut discretionary spending. Discretionary spending is not the problem. It's the mandatory side, and it goes back in history all the way back to 65, even in the 30s when some of these things were built. This thing was never supposed to be bankrupt, supposed to be sustainable. Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund. My question for you is, aside from the semantics, and I agree, I think Senator Gregg, you said this, and Senator Conrad, you've echoed some of the tax expenditures need to be discussed. It's an expense item, it's like anything else, including entitlements. We don't do a capital budget. I mean, how in the world can we build aircraft carriers and not have a capital budget? My question for you is this, very simply, both of you, is how do we build, what type of consequences, besides sequestration, even the 5%, with due respect, we've proven that that draconian thing of 10% should never have happened, but it did. It took 25% out of our military spending over a decade and caused a readiness crisis, honestly. So that's not the answer, in my opinion. The answer is the lack of performance on our side. I agree so much with Senator Van Hollen. It does come down to human performance, but we have proven over 45 years we can't rely on that. Only 4 times in 45 years did that work. So my question to you is how and what consequences and how would you implement it on back of some of the systemic changes that you're both recommending? And you could throw a blanket over both of yours. I would take any combination of that. It would be better than what we have now, but both will fail unless we have some type of consequences on the body, and including OMB and the White House, who are charged with coming up with an approval spending plan that keeps us out of this kind of disaster. And by the way, it's not just $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year goes to $2 trillion really in the very short period of time we're looking at here. And so the economy is growing at a rate now where we could argue that it's lowered, not only did it not increase expenses, it actually lowered the debt curve by about $3 trillion, according to the OMB, who said that it pays for itself if you only grow 0.4%. And we're doing more than that now. Again, the question is, how would you build a consequence that would be meaningful, that would assure that the recommendations that you're proposing here would get us to a budget that would include mandatory and discretionary spending? Senator Conrad, you want to start?
I don't know.
It's a question of our time.
Honestly, I've spent so many hours contemplating this. I don't have an answer for you, Senator Perdue, on what leads people. I'll tell you what I believe after being here 26 years. If people aren't seriously committed to making it work, any system you construct will fail. And what's happening now is a perfect example. I mean, we've had a budget, as defective as it is, we've had it work in the past. I mean,
but only four times, with due respect, only 4 times.
Well,
45
4
years.
times. 4 times is not nothing. So it has worked. But I don't know of any system that you construct that people won't figure out a way to waive, amend, defer, delay. So, you know, somehow it's got to be leadership. It's got to be people really committed to making it happen. Yes, we need these process reforms. You know, the one I raised, I really feel strongly about, because, you know, the way it works, every leader knows that if a budget doesn't come out of the Budget Committee, any member can go to the floor and put forward a budget resolution, and it's treated as though it came from the committee.
Right.
So the problem is, what's happening? We're passing them in the Budget Committee on both sides. Both sides do this. Yeah. They pass it in the Budget Committee, so that locks out any member from going to the floor and putting on a resolution. I say, take that protection away. I would love to see what would happen if an individual member could put forward a budget resolution because the budget resolution didn't come to the floor because the leader held it up. Well, I tell you, we'd be back to having budget resolutions, I think.
Chairman, I'm over my time, but could Senator Gregg respond to that? Sorry.
Well, I think the essence of what Senator Conrad said I agree with, which is that there isn't a clear path. If there were, somebody would have probably put it in place. I've suggested a mechanism in here that I think is reasonably draconian, extremely draconian, more draconian than the sequester exercise that would force, hopefully, action on the budget. But I honestly think that if you're going to really do it, you've got to go back to thinking outside the box. And you've got to recognize that regular order does not work any longer in the Congress. And you've got to have a structure like Simpson Bowles. I hate to beat a dead horse, because I don't think it's dead. I think if you put together a Simpson Bowles commission again, and you put on it the right players from both sides, both parties, and it had the no amendment language, and it had a charge to get to a certain percent of GDP, debt to GDP ratio, you'd get a pretty good package that come out of that group. It works with base closure. I guess you're going to do another base closure bill? Did I see that somewhere? It worked. Base closure went through, what, 5 times we went through base closure?
Yeah.
You guys in Virginia certainly remember that. We in New Hampshire do too. But that is, you got to go outside the box, because regular order, it simply isn't going to work, and set up a structure that allows action to occur and then requires the Congress to either vote the action up or down.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.